The old hands were in the dirt before the sun was up. Knuckles like walnuts, scars from 100 wrenches. He was on his knees under the sagging porch of a farmhouse he had not stepped foot on in 40 years, digging with his bare fingers because he had forgotten to bring a trowel. The earth was cold. It smelled like spring rain and old wood, and something he could not name yet. Something that had been waiting. 40 years he had been gone. Now the bank wanted the place inside of 72 hours, and Earl McKay, 64 years old, gray beard down to the patch on his chest, was on his belly in the mud looking for a thing he did not even know was there. Why was he digging? What had pulled him down to his knees in front of his own ghost? Stay with me. Because what he was about to pull out from under that porch was not what any of us would have guessed. Not even him. His name was Earl. The patch on his vest said Diesel. He had been Diesel longer than he had been Earl, longer than he had been a son, longer than he had been a husband. The bike was parked out front in the gravel, a 1998 Heritage Softal he had bought used the year his wife Mary first got sick. The chrome was tired. The leather seat had a split in it that he had stitched himself with fishing line one night in a motel outside Erie. He sat on the porch step now and let the engine tick down behind him, and he did not move for a long time. The screen door was gone. Somebody had taken it. Probably kids. The wood under his boots was soft in places, and he could feel a give in the second step that he remembered from when he was 9 years old, running out the door with a fishing pole over his shoulder and his daddy hollering after him to take a hat. He had not taken the hat. He had come home sunburned and proud, with 3 little perch on a stringer, and his mother had pretended to scold him while she fried them up in butter. He remembered her apron, the one with the cornflowers on it. He wondered if anything inside was the same. He wondered if he had the stomach to find out. He stayed on that step for an hour. A car went by once slow. The sun came up over the field across the way, and he watched the dew burn off the grass, and he heard a meadowlark in the fence row, and he closed his eyes and he was 11 again, with a slingshot in his back pocket. Believe me, the body remembers what the mind has put away. He had left this house when he was 24. He had not come back for the funeral. He had not come back when the letter came in 1992 that told him his father had been dead for 3 years already, and that his mother was on her own now. He had sent money sometimes. He had called twice. His mother had passed in 2014, and even then he had not come back. He had buried her in Greensburg next to her people, and he had signed some papers and ridden away. The house had sat empty for 12 years. Pipes froze and burst one winter. A raccoon got in the kitchen and never quite got out. The bank had been writing him letters for 2 years about back taxes. He had thrown them away. All of them except the last one, and that one had a date on it, and the date was 3 days from today, and that was why he was here. He had a thermos of coffee on the step beside him, a folding knife on his belt, a pack of unfiltered Camels in his vest pocket that he had not lit because he had quit in 2003 and only carried them out of habit, the way some men carry a wedding ring after the wife is gone. He carried that too, on a chain around his neck. Mary's ring. She had passed in 2019 in a hospital bed in Pittsburgh, and the last thing she said to him was that he ought to go home before he ran out of time to go home. He had told her he did not have a home. She had smiled. She had said, "You do, you old fool, and you know exactly where it is." Then she had closed her eyes. That had been it. The vest he was wearing was older than most of the rooms in the house. He had earned the bottom rocker in 1978. The 3-piece patch had been on his back for 46 years. The leather had been to 48 states, and the back was scuffed from a slide he took on Route 30 in '86. The patch on his chest said Diesel, and underneath in smaller letters, Road Captain. He had been the road captain for the Iron Vagabonds out of Latrobe for 19 years. The boys still called him Cap. He had not called any of them about being here. He did not know what he would say. He did not know what he was doing here exactly, except that the bank had given him a date, and Mary had given him an order, and the years had given him this slow, sore-jointed pulling back toward the place you came from that nobody warns you about when you are young and angry. He stood up. His right knee popped. He brushed off the seat of his jeans, and he walked up onto the porch, and he put his hand on the doorframe, and he stood there for another long minute before he went in. The kitchen smelled like mice and dust and old wallpaper paste. A 2014 calendar still hung on the wall with a picture of a covered bridge. His mother's apron was on a nail by the stove. The cornflowers were faded. The strings had gone yellow. He touched it with 2 fingers and did not pick it up. He could not have picked it up just then. He walked through the front room, and the floor groaned at him like it remembered. The couch was gone. The braided rug was still there. Above the mantel hung a photograph in a tarnished frame. A boy of about 7, freckled, gap-toothed, sitting up on a green Oliver tractor with his hands on the wheel and his hat pushed back. The boy was him. The tractor had been his father's. He did not remember the day. He remembered the tractor. On the mantel itself, laid down on its side like somebody had set it there for a minute and forgot it, was his father's pipe. Briar with the stem chewed. He picked it up. He smelled the bowl. He thought he would smell tobacco. He smelled only wood. He set it back down. Then he thought better of it and he set it upright instead, the way his father would have liked it, the way it had been set every night of every year that Earl had ever lived in this house. He stood back and he looked at it. Then he looked at the floor. Then he sat down in his father's chair without meaning to. It was a wooden chair with a wide, flat seat, and the right arm worn smooth from 40 years of one man's elbow. He had never sat in it before. Not once in his life. It had not been allowed. He sat in it now, and he closed his eyes and he heard, as clear as if it had just been said, the last thing his father had ever said to him. It had been a Sunday. October of 1981. He had come home for what he thought would be supper, and what had turned into something else. He had been wearing this same vest, then a year old. He had been riding with the vagabonds for 2 years. He had thought, the way 24-year-old men think, that he had finally figured himself out, and all he needed was for his father to look at him and see it. His father had looked at him. His father had not seen it. His father had said it quiet and clean, the way a man cuts kindling. "You think that vest makes you a man," his father had said. "It does not make you a man. It makes you a stranger in my house." Earl had stood up from the table. He had said something back he no longer remembered the shape of, only the heat of. He had walked to the door. He had slammed it so hard the glass in the top half had cracked. He had ridden away. The crack in the glass was still there. 40 years and nobody had fixed it. He looked at it a long time. Then he got up and walked back outside, because the room was too full of things he had not asked to remember. He sat on the porch step again and poured coffee from the thermos. The steam came up in the cool air. A tractor was running somewhere a long way off. He thought, sitting there, that maybe he would just let the bank have it. He was 64. His knees hurt. He had a 1-bedroom apartment in Greensburg and a club full of brothers who would feed him any night of the week. What did he need with a falling-down farmhouse on a dirt road in a county he had spent 40 years trying not to think about? Let the bank have it. He had come. He had stood in the kitchen. He had touched the apron. He had sat in the chair. He had done what Mary asked. That was enough. He was old and he was tired, and he was about to leave. He stood up. He poured the last of the coffee into the dirt. He capped the thermos. He took one step down off the porch. That was when he saw the board. It was the third board in from the right, under the porch overhang, where a man's boot would not naturally fall coming down the steps. It was flush with the others, but the nail on the near end sat up about 1/8 of an inch proud, like it had been pulled and pushed back by hand. Earl knew that board. He had loosened it himself, the summer of 1973, when he was 16 and hiding Lucky Strikes from his mother. He had pried the nail with his pocket knife and slid the cigarettes under there in a tin Suckerets box, and once a day he had crawled under and gotten one and smoked it down by the creek. He had not thought of that board in 50 years. His body had remembered. His eyes had gone right to it. He stopped. He stood with one foot on the step and one foot on the ground. He looked at the board. He told himself to keep walking. He told himself that whatever was under there was a boy's secret, and a boy's secret was nothing he needed to disturb at 64 years old with a bank deadline 3 days out and a long ride back to Greensburg ahead of him. He told himself a lot of things. None of them moved his feet. He stood there for what felt like a long minute, and then he got down on one knee, and he took out his folding knife, and he pried the board up. He expected to see a rusted Suckerets tin with a few crumbled Lucky Strikes inside. He saw, instead, the corner of something else. Something deeper. Something wrapped in oilcloth that had gone dark with age, set down into the dirt below the level where a boy would have hidden cigarettes. The oilcloth was older than anything he had hidden. It had been there longer than he had been gone. He stared at it. He felt the hair on the back of his neck come up. His own little tin was not there at all. It had rotted away or been taken, or maybe his mother had found it after all and just never said. But underneath where his tin had been, somebody had put something else. Somebody who knew about that board. Somebody who must have watched a 16-year-old boy pry it up and put it back, and who had pried it up himself, after the boy was grown and gone, and laid something down where the boy had once laid his small lie. Earl knew, before he even pulled it out, who it had been. His hands shook a little, getting it free. The oilcloth was stiff. The shape underneath was a box, flat and rectangular, about the size of a family Bible. He set it on the porch, and he sat down beside it. He took his knife, and he cut the twine that held the oilcloth closed. He folded the cloth back. Inside was a metal box, painted dark green, with a hinged lid and a small brass clasp. It was the kind of box a man might use to keep papers safe in a barn. It was not locked. He opened it. The first thing he saw was a leather-bound book. Cracked. Soft. The cover had a name tooled into it that he did not at first recognize, because the name was just initials, H.M., 1955, and his father's name had been Harlan McKay, and Earl had never in his life thought of his father as anyone with initials on a leather book. Under the book was a roll of papers tied with a piece of string. Under the papers was a small stack of photographs. Under the photographs, at the very bottom, there was an envelope. The envelope was sealed. The envelope had his own name on it. Earl, in his father's handwriting. The date in the corner said September 1981. 3 weeks before the fight. 3 weeks before he had walked out the door and slammed the glass and never come back. Earl set the envelope aside. He could not look at it yet. He picked up the book. He opened it. The first page said, in his father's careful slanted hand, Ridgeline Riders founding logbook, Harlan McKay, road captain. Then a date. May 14, 1955. Earl stared at the page. He read it again. He turned to the next page. There was a roster. 10 names. His father's name at the top. Underneath in the same hand were notes, bike makes, addresses, a meeting place at a feed store on Route 22, dues of $2 a month. He turned the page again. There were route notes, hand-drawn maps, a run to Bedford on the third Sunday of every month, a long route up to Lake Erie in September of '56. Mileage, gas stops, the name of a diner outside Punxsutawney, where the boys ate breakfast at 3 in the morning after a night run. Earl read these things, and his hands began to shake worse than they had when he was lifting the box out of the ground. He set the book down. He picked up the photographs. He looked at the top one. It was a Polaroid, faded almost to nothing, of 7 young men leaning on motorcycles in front of a barn. They were grinning. They had grease on their hands. They had cuff sleeves and slicked hair. The man in the middle, holding the front wheel of an Indian chief like it was a prize cow, was Earl's father. 25 years old. A road captain. A biker. A thing Earl had spent his entire adult life believing his father had hated him for being. A thing that, sitting under the porch of his own boyhood home with the dusk coming on, Earl now understood his father had been first. He set the photograph on his knee. He sat there a long time. He did not cry yet. That would come later. Right then, he just felt the bottom drop out of 40 years of one particular kind of grief, and he felt something else come up in its place, something quieter, something more dangerous, something almost like a question being answered. Hey now, friend, wherever you are tonight, if you have ever stood at the edge of something your own father carried and never told you, give this old story a thumb up and say a quiet word for Earl on his porch step. Let him know somebody is listening too. He went through the book page by page. Routes for 56, 57, 58. Then in late 58 the entries got thinner. Then in March of 59 there was just one line in his father's hand, Medelliner. Then a gap. Then in October of 59 married. Then nothing more until June of 1960, sold the Indian to pay the hospital bill. Earl, 8 pounds 4 ounces. And under that smaller, almost an afterthought, Ridgeline Riders disbanded. Boys have wives now. We did good. The last page of the logbook had a list of mileage totals. 41,216 miles. Earl read that number 3 times. He sat with it. 41,000 miles his father had ridden in 5 short years, on a motorcycle he had then sold to pay for Earl's own being born. His father had been a biker. His father had stopped being a biker so that Earl could exist. His father had then watched Earl, at 24, put on a vest and ride away on a bike of his own, and his father had looked across a supper table and said a thing he should not have said, and Earl had slammed a door and never come home, and his father had never told him. Never told him that he had ridden too. Never told him that he had once been called captain by men who loved him. Never told him that the bike Earl rode away on was a thing his father knew the smell and the shape of in his bones. 40 years. 40 years of one quiet old man in a farmhouse, and his son out on the road, and nobody saying the thing that would have let them sit on the same porch and laugh. The dusk was coming on. The light was that long golden violet color that the Pennsylvania hills give you in May. Earl picked up the roll of papers and untied the string. It was a deed and a tax stub and a small stack of receipts, bills paid, the original deed to the farm in his grandfather's name from 1922, and tucked in the middle, the title to a 1953 Indian chief, signed over from Harlan McKay to a man named Garrett Sims in May of 1960. The signature was firm. The pen had pressed hard. Earl ran his thumb over his father's name, and the ink came off a little on his skin, and he closed his hand around the title, and he sat for another long minute. Then he picked up the envelope. The envelope with his own name on it in his father's hand, dated 3 weeks before the fight. He held it on his lap. He thought of opening it inside in the chair. He thought of waiting until morning. He thought of taking it home to Greensburg and reading it in his recliner with a glass of bourbon, the way a man ought to read a letter from a dead father. Then he thought of his father, who had buried this thing under the same board his son had used at 16 to hide cigarettes, and he thought that his father had not wanted him to read it in any chair anywhere else. His father had wanted him to read it here, on this porch, in this dusk. He took out his folding knife. He slid it under the flap. He cut the envelope open clean. There were 2 sheets inside. His father's handwriting filled both. The date at the top was September 19, 1981. The day, Earl realized as he read, that he had earned his first patch with the Vagabonds and had ridden home long enough to show his father, and then ridden back to Latrobe to celebrate. His father had not said much that day. His father had looked at the vest. His father had nodded once. Earl had taken the nod for grudging tolerance. Earl had not known that his father had gone into the kitchen after Earl rode away, and had sat down at the kitchen table and had written this letter, and had not been able to give it to him because 3 weeks later they had a fight over something else, and a door slammed, and a piece of glass cracked, and 4 decades went by. Earl read the letter out loud. He did not know he was going to. His voice came out rough and slow on the porch in the dusk, and he read it to the field across the road, and to the meadowlark in the fence row, and to the ghost of his mother in her cornflower apron, and to whatever part of his father was still in the wood of the chair and the bowl of the pipe. Dear Earl, his father had written. I never was a man for saying things out loud. Your mother knows. She has carried it for me for 20-some years. Today you came home with a patch on your back, and I could not say what I should have said. I could not say that I rode too. I could not say that I know that road, and the cold on your hands at 3 in the morning, and the way the brothers feel when they pull up beside you in the dark. I sold my Indian the year you were born, and I told myself I had put it away, and I had not put it away. A man does not put that away. He just sets it down for a while. I have been afraid, son, that if I told you I had been where you are going, you would think I was trying to ride your road for you. I do not want to ride your road. I want you to ride it. Today I saw you ride it for the first time, and I could not speak. So I am writing this down instead, and I will give it to you when I can find the words to hand it over. I am proud of you. I have been proud of you since the day I sold the Indian. Ride safe. Ride long. Come home sometimes. Your father, Harlan. The second sheet had only 1 line. It said, if you are reading this and I am gone, look under the 3rd board. There is something there for you. The rest is yours. Earl set the letter down on the porch. He sat with his hands folded between his knees. He looked at the field. The meadowlark had gone quiet. The light was almost gone now. He did not cry the way he thought he would. He cried the way old men cry, when something they have carried for a long time finally gets set down. Quiet. Without sound. The tears just went where they went, and he did not wipe them away. He sat that way until the dark came all the way down, and then he wiped his face on his sleeve, and he picked up the box, and he carried it inside, and he set it on the table in the kitchen next to his mother's apron, and he went out to the porch one more time, and he sat on the step, and he watched the stars come up over the field, and he stayed there until the cold drove him in. In the morning, he called the bank. He drove into town. He paid the back taxes in full out of the old 50s cash that he found under the photographs in the second tray of the box. $840 in bills with paper bands still on them, more than enough, and he signed a paper that said the house was his and that the bank would not be coming back. He drove home to the farm. He sat in the chair. He picked up the pipe. He cleaned it. He set it back on the mantel, upright. Then he went out and got his own pipe, the one he had bought in '79 and not smoked in 20 years, and he set it on the mantel beside his father's. 2 pipes. He stood back and he looked at them, and he nodded once, the way his father had nodded at him on the day of the first patch, and he thought, all right. All right then. He called the boys that weekend. He told them to come up. He did not tell them why. 11 of them rolled in on a Saturday afternoon, bikes lined up in the gravel where his father's old Ford had once parked, leather and chrome catching the sun. They walked up onto the porch and they hugged him one by one, and they did not ask questions, the way the good ones never do. He fed them on the picnic table in the yard. He pulled out the logbook after supper. He passed it around. He let each one of them read a page or two. They sat on his porch in the dusk, and they passed the book hand to hand, and they said the same kind of quiet things men say when they are looking at the faces of other men who rode before them. "Look at that Indian," one of them said. "Look at those grins," said another. "Your old man, Cap," said a third, a 60-year-old man named Trout who had been his sergeant-at-arms for 12 years. "Your old man was one of us." Earl nodded. He said, "I know. I know it now." Trout looked at him for a long time. Trout said, "Took you long enough?" Earl said, "Yes. Yes, it did." They stayed 2 nights. They drank coffee in the morning on the porch and beer in the evening on the porch, and they told stories. Some they had told 100 times and some Earl had never heard. On the second night, Trout pulled out a harmonica and played something slow that Earl did not know the name of, and the others got quiet, and Earl sat on the same step where he had sat on the morning he came home, and he looked at the field, and the meadowlark was back, and Earl thought about his father at 25 with grease on his hands in front of a barn somewhere, and he thought about himself at 24 slamming a door. And he thought about himself at 64 with 11 brothers on the porch and his father's logbook on his lap. And he understood for the first time that the thing he had spent 40 years thinking was the wall between him and his father had been the door all along. He just had not known how to walk through it. His father had known. His father had walked through it himself, in pen and ink, on a Saturday in September of 1981, and had buried the walking through under a board his son had loosened at 16, and had trusted the boy to come back one day and find it. He hung the pipe back on the mantel the last morning before everybody rolled out. He stood in the front room and he looked at the photograph of himself on the tractor, and he looked at the crack in the glass of the front door, and he did not feel the need to fix the crack. He left it. The crack was part of the story now. The story had a shape now. The story had 2 pipes on the mantel, and a logbook on the table, and 11 sets of tire tracks in the gravel. The story was all right. He stood on the porch that night, alone again. The bikes were gone. The dusk came down. The same porch. The same hour. The same old man with the same patch on his back. Same silence. Different silence. Believe me, there is a kind of silence that is empty, and there is a kind of silence that is full, and a man does not always know which one he is sitting in until he has sat in both. He sat in the full one now. He thought about Mary. He thought about how she would have laughed. He thought about how she would have said, "You old fool, I told you." He thought about his mother in her cornflower apron and his father at 25, and his father at 60 and himself at 24 and himself at 64, and the road between all of those men, and he understood that the road had never stopped. It had only waited. It had only set itself down for a while. The way his father had set down the Indian. A whippoorwill started up somewhere in the dark. Earl listened. He took out the unfiltered Camel he had been carrying for 23 years, and he did not light it. He just held it. He looked at the field. He looked at the porch board, third in from the right, nail seated back down flush now where it belonged. He nodded once. He went inside. He left the door open behind him a little, just a crack, the way his father used to in summer, so the night could come in if it wanted to. The night came in. The house held it. The old man and the old house breathed together in the dark, and the silence was full, and the road went on.